2010, it's been argued this could be a very good year for somebody with David Hoffman's resume. He was an assistant U.S. attorney under Patrick Fitzgerald, targeting gangs. He rooted out corruption as the city's inspector general and served on a high-profile commission to reform state government in the wake of the impeachment and indictment of Rod Blagojevich. But according to Politico.com just today, Hoffman hasn't seen much traction since joining the Democratic primary race for U.S. Senate, either in public attention or in fundraising. What's it going to take to win this nomination against Alexei Giannoulias and, as of today, Cheryl Jackson? Joining us now is David Hoffman. Welcome
to
Chicago tonight.
Appreciate it.
So, you're not, as I understand it, going to take PAC money or lobbyist contributions. The unions aren't supporting you that I've seen so far, and you've never served in any sort of elective status. How do you win this?
You know, Carol, I just got back from a 3-day trip around the state, retracing some of the steps of the Illinois Reform Commission that I was on. And in talking to people around the cities of Illinois, I do think that there's just a crisis of trust, and people want someone who has been outside of the political establishment and not just talking the talk, but has a record of challenging the system, someone who's been fighting for accountability, someone who's been standing up for taxpayers. You know, everyone's going to be a reform candidate this year. But I have a record. I've been in public service for 16 years, and certainly the last 11 years as a federal prosecutor and inspector general of Chicago. I have a record I can point to where people can trust that my record will mean that I'll be independent and remain that way in the Senate.
At the same time, you must even yourself have to say, what kind of appetite for reform is there really? I mean, you become the reform inspector general. Turns out everything you do the mayor doesn't like. You get appointed by Quinn for this reform commission that ultimately he backs away from in some of your toughest recommendations. Is this state really ready for reform, or is it just angry and giving up?
No, I think it is ready, but I don't think we can judge whether it's ready by how the insiders react. I think that's the point. I mean, I just think that voters feel very disconnected. They feel that they're not sure who they can trust. And I do think the voters of this state, of this county, of this city, across the state, people are ready for change. And I do think that, look, for decades and decades, part of our culture has been too tolerant of corruption. And I do think that the recent events have really galvanized people, and there's a desire for change. And I tell you, the conventional wisdom about how insiders react, I'm just not going to pay much attention to it. I haven't in my prior jobs, and I'm not going to pay attention to it here. We've got 5 months, and I'm ready to make the case.
So people are trolling through your own record, and one of the things that has caused some people to truly highlight your biography is the fact that you clerked for Supreme Court Justice Chief William Rehnquist, an extremely conservative appellate court justice Dennis Jacobs, and then they say, these guys had rulings that went against women and minorities and were criticized by moderates as well as people on the left. So who is David Hoffman? Are you one of these guys in terms of ideology?
Look, I've always been a Democrat. In fact, in law school, prior to these clerkships, I was the head of the law school Democrats. And if you're lucky enough in law school to be in a position to apply for a Supreme Court clerkship, what the law professors tell you is you apply to all 9. Because it's really an honor to clerk on the Supreme Court no matter who you clerk for. And you really can't tell anyone anything about someone's ideology by who they clerk for. One of the best examples is Judge Richard Posner on the appellate court here, who's widely considered a conservative judge. He clerked for Justice Brennan, one of the great liberal justices. So it was an honor to clerk for Chief Justice Rehnquist. And it was an honor to go into that building every day. I learned a tremendous amount. And, you know, there were some arguments, discussions in chambers, and that was wonderful. And for both the judges I clerked for, it was encouraged to state your view. That was a great training experience. I'm not in favor of just having those experiences where everyone agrees, and that was the story in those chambers.
Well, if you get to the U.S. Senate, there's going to be some on-the-job training too, because that's a great indoctrination into a brand new job. Where are you on health reform in terms of the public option, and do you feel that Barack Obama has backed too far away from it?
Well, I'm in favor of the public option. I think we need to take a strong stand. I saw that the Finance Committee, a proposal that came out today, did back away from it significantly, and I disagree with that. I think the President gave a great speech the other night, and he was fairly strong on public option, and I would encourage them to stay as strong as they can. It's an important and critical element of this reform package in terms of making insurance companies accountable, in terms of adding competition to the system. And, you know, the right-wing talk shows that have really tried to make much of this and say that it's going to be mandatory and people will be taken out of their current health care plans, it's just not true. It's an option. It's a government-run not-for-profit that would be allowed to compete with the private insurers and would be there to help people who can't afford insurance. And I tell you, we're one of the wealthiest nations in this world, and that we can't afford to provide, that we can't come up with a system that provides health insurance for 46 million people who are uninsured, I just think is an outrage. We need to do something to change it.
As somebody who talks a lot about reform and has worked in the field of reform for a long time, how are you feeling about Wall Street? Because every piece of serious reporting I've seen, from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times, really talks about the fact that the banks got a lot of money. They have not, and Wall Street has not, done very much to change the way it operates, including some risky new derivatives.
It is a total outrage. It's a total outrage. And look, recessions happen, but the depth of this recession was, I'm convinced, avoidable. Wall Street acted with greed and irresponsibility, and Washington sat on its hands. There was no demands for transparency, no demands for accountability or meaningful oversight of the banks. And you're exactly right. These buying and selling of these exotic instruments that turned out to have no value, it collapsed, and the house of cards fell on us. And nothing has changed. The big salaries and bonuses have returned. And really, it's not just a Wall Street problem. Here in Illinois, Chorus Bank failed last week, and they were same kind of things, risky loans, undercapitalization, paying out dividends to the shareholders and owners. And there's just too much of it. I mean, one of the things, if I'm in the Senate, I will continue my record of fighting for accountability, insisting on transparency and oversight, and that can make a difference in terms of protecting us from the big private companies and banks.
People don't know you. If they've watched Chicago politics and that sort of thing, they might, but statewide they don't. Let's do a very short kind of question and answer on who are you? Born on the North Shore, right?
Born in San Francisco, moved back to Chicago when I was 1 year old. My family's a fourth-generation Chicago family.
High school?
Went to New Trier High School.
College?
Went to Yale.
Law school?
University of Chicago.
In terms of your own sort of personal story, married, kids?
I'm married. I have a 2-year-old. We have 2 dogs and 2 cats at home.
What's on your iPod?
What's on my iPod? The Strokes, Morrissey, Interpol, and The Clash, among others.
Last book that you read?
Last book that I read a Saul Bellow book called The Adventures of Augie March.
Favorite movie?
Heat by Michael Mann. Anything by Michael Mann.
Your major accomplishment as far as you are concerned as Inspector General?
You know, I think people like to focus on individual cases and individual reports, but to me the biggest accomplishment was turning that office into something that was fiercely independent and that people could trust that it was independent. And I have to say, I am very, very proud of that, because we need more of that in city government. We need more of that in the city. We need more independent voices who are going to take stands, regardless of whether it makes people angry, and just say what they think is the right answer. And with regard to our government, and I think this is true at the city, county, state, and federal level, people want more of that. People want independent voices who are going to push for accountability and push against fraud and waste. It is our tax dollars. And I always believed that our bosses in that office were the taxpayers. That, to me, was the most important approach, not other people in city government. And I'm proud of that.
David Hoffman, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be following your campaign and those of your opponents.
Thank you.
Chicago Tonight continues in a moment.